Hey there, howdy, and welcome to Humans of Magic. This week, there's not going to be a fancy intro. Instead, I'm just going to tell you about my guest. Michael Clifford, aka Cliffy, is a friend of mine. We met while playing the Legacy format a couple of years ago. We played a few GPs together, and I wanted to give this intro because Michael is not someone who is as well known in the Magic content space. Michael is a brilliant mind, a guy with many interests just like me. He's really into the intersection of poker and magic, which is what we explore here. See, Michael went from a competitive magic player playing Storm Combo in the Legacy format to actually becoming a full time poker pro. And we've had a lot of interesting conversations over the years. We decided this time, let's just turn the camera on. Let's talk about it. We talk about a bunch of interesting topics. For example, how Michael leveled up in Magic, how he leveled up in poker, why Lurrus is absolutely broken in Storm Combo the time that it was legal, game theory, what game theory optimal is in poker, all that fun stuff. Michael, aka Cliffy, is absolutely wonderful to talk to. He told me afterwards, James, we had a lot of tangents in this episode. I apologize. And I told him, no need to apologize. Humans of Magic is all about wonderful conversation and therefore wonderful tangents. So please enjoy this episode with Michael Clifford. All right, Michael, how are you doing today?
I am doing very great. Thanks for having me on, James.
It's a pleasure. Before we get started, I want to know, do you prefer Cliffy? Do you prefer Michael, Mike? Like, what's the story here?
I guess let's go with Cliffy because that's what most of the magic world knows me as. If your first name's Michael and you grew up in America, you probably go by anything really.
Is that
Because
is that
every
true? It's like there's just too many Michaels in a school or in a class or something.
Yeah, and I don't think I ever had a single class where I was the only Michael, at least for my generation.
Yeah, I guess I got kind of lucky just being James. There's only like maybe one other James in the class, but you're right. Like Michael must be one of the most common first names out there, right? Maybe David or I don't know what else.
I know it's pretty high up. I don't have a stat to say how high, but it's definitely a very common name in Western America.
Yeah. So, Cliffy, why don't we just get started by telling the listener or viewer a little bit about yourself? Like, how did you get into magic? Or maybe I should say, how did you get into competitive magic?
Sure. So I started the way a lot of people did, playing with kids at school. I learned from a like a daycare. Like we had YMCA kind of after school programs growing up for when parents work. I played with the kids there. One of the supervisors taught me how to play. Played pretty casually, just like with kids and stuff for fun, and really enjoyed it. Took off. Just asked as a kid all the time for all my gifts to be magic cards. And then when I got a little older, I understood that most of the people I'm playing against like don't really have a clue what's going on. I really want to see what competitive magic looks like. Made a trip down to my local LGS, and they explained kind of what the formats were. And I really didn't have any ability to acquire standard cards, so I decided Legacy was a good option because I can play with anything I want. And so I show up, I bring some 60 card pile of nonsense and, get my ass kicked. And then someone goes, "You should look online for sites." And online, I found deck lists, I found articles, I found content of people creating stuff, and it just kind of clicked. And then I started showing up to some proxy events. Our local scene was really good about proxies
Where was
for a
this local
while.
scene? Were you on the West Coast, East Coast?
Oh yeah, California. I should specify that. Yeah.
Okay.
Uh, I grew up in California, North California. I played a lot at the shop Outer Plains. Uh, Kind of built one deck and rode with it as long as I could. Uh, I started playing some kind of brain dead decks, and then as soon as we started proxying things, I started trying a bunch of other stuff. Oh, what does a Chalice deck feel like? What does a blue deck feel like? What does a prison deck feel like? Proxies are really nice for helping a local scene. And I just started showing up every week. I found what worked that I liked. I really started to like blue decks in Magic. A lot of decisions you get to make are fun. You get a lot of the ability to learn the mechanics of the game when you play blue, which is something I really like. It felt like if I were to hand someone a legacy deck and I told them this is the best deck to learn the game with, it would probably be Delver because you get to see how your pieces interact with theirs and you learn a lot that way. And then I ended settling on Miracles. I was a big fan of that deck. I started playing on Magic Online. Started talking to a lot of friends. Made a lot of friends at the locals. One of my best friends, Cyrus. I remember his first day back
This
at
is
the locals.
Cyrus Corman Gill, right?
Yes, yeah, he was on your cast like a couple years ago, I think, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he
Yeah,
was.
he was also proxying decks, and he was back apparently after a long break. I remember we were both just playing horrible. Like he's trying to like Snapcaster Ponders on my end step, and I'm trying to like cast basically Doomblades at his face and stuff. You know, we're both just button clicking, and then we end up talking, and we become friendly. Um, he absolutely hated all the decks I played because I played a lot of cheap combo decks, and he hated that. uh,
That's right. He didn't start off as a combo player, right? That's what I
no,
remember.
no, he really liked Burn and Delver, and Fair decks. And I was like, why don't you just cast Show and Tell, Cyrus? It's really fun.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, and we had a lot of fun playing Legacy together. After weeklies, we'd hang out, maybe we eat food and jam games. We built some very atrocious Legacy decks just for fun, just absolute tier 6 garbage piles, and we test against each other at like 4 a.m. with his tier 6 Chromox Goblin nonsense versus my like predict aggro Goblin Guide combo nonsense decks.
I guess that's where
Uh,
he got. That's when he got his love of Goblin Guide. He's always been like referencing
yeah,
Goblin Guide, I
he's
think. Yeah.
probably. Yeah, and so I was playing Miracles for a long time, and I ended up never being able to beat some really good pilots online that were playing combo decks. So I decided to proxy it up, and oh my god, was it a blast! Um,
This
and
is some sort of
then
storm combo deck that you started.
oh yeah, I proxied up Ant.
Okay.
First I played Ant. I thought it was too tough, so I started playing Test, and then I
By the
realized
way,
Test is
just
even
because this
tougher.
podcast might not be for like super legacy
Oh
affluent
yeah,
people, I'm just gonna like try to make you clarify every single acronym. So ad nauseum tendrils, right? That's the storm combo
yes.
deck. Okay.
I yes, I'll explain. Ad nauseum Tendrils is a storm-based combo deck that most of the time tries to win at the last second possible. It likes to very slowly uh, set someone up for failure rather than a faster version of the deck, the Epic Storm, just looking for the best window and taking it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, I found that the Epic Storm is a little harder to play because you end up playing from behind a lot more. Where with Ad nauseum Tendrils, it's really like a game of inches. Like something I really like about the deck is that you learn little interactions, little level up moments. And I feel that that really taught me how to learn strategy games in a in a grand sense of finding these little level up moments.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up moving mostly to that deck. I realized that if you just put in volume and you goldfish it a bunch, you get better. It's really a deck that rewards you for putting in mass volume and playing it smart too.
Mm-hmm.
Rewatching your matches, finding things. I used to stream just so I could watch VODs of me playing it back. It's a really good deck to
Mm.
watch yourself play, and you go, well, that was stupid.
So just to backtrack a little bit, you said you started learning Magic, way back. And what was the amount of time between like just playing Magic casually to then going to your LGS? And how old were you when you went to your LGS?
I was probably 12 or 13, and I think I started playing when I was 8 or so, so about 4 to 5 years of playing as a kid. And when I became a teenager, it seemed a little more attractive because you show up to a weekly, it's fun. You tell your friends, oh, I played at a tournament, and they go, because they're 12.
Yeah. Sure. And you stuck with Legacy all this time? You said you went from Standard to Legacy fairly quickly, but did you just stay with Legacy on that track?
I just enjoyed the freedom to play whatever cards are in the existence of the game. You see a new list come out, you just get to play it. I dislike the rotating element of the game just because, it's hard to obtain cards that are going to be worthless in 2 years,
Yeah, yeah.
especially when you're a kid and unemployed.
Yeah, I hear that. I mean, even coming back into Magic as an adult, like, because that's basically what I did. I played Magic in, I want to say, like, started in the 90s, and then I basically dropped off and didn't play at all, like in the early 2000s. And then when I got back in 2008 or 2009, I just decided to play Legacy because that was actually just kind of similar reason, right? It's just that I could play any card I wanted, and there was also a whole bunch of cards that I missed out on because I didn't play Magic during a certain era. So I was just like, okay, well, Legacy seems good for that. And also what you said, which is about cards not rotating out, right? Just being able to uh, theoretically play a deck forever. Although I guess we now know in Legacy that's not quite true either. But
It was
but
true
at the
for a
time
bit.
it was kind of the value proposition. So
When I started, you could just take a stock D&T list, put it down for 2 years, pick it up, and it would be fine.
mm, yeah, and now they're just printing like new D&T creatures like every, I don't know,
Every
three
set
six
has,
months.
yeah.
Every year there's a new initiative that there's a new Freudian slip. There's a new mechanic, i.e., initiative that you have to keep track of, and there's like
Some
all this
outside
kind
the
of
game
stuff.
mechanic. Yeah.
Exactly, dungeon. I
Legacy's
guess.
a good format, though, to just put things down. I agree with that. It's a good format. You
Yeah,
can take a deck, put it down. It's been a little bit harder, though, recently to do that.
yeah, and I think you were also involved. Like you played Legacy like pretty much nonstop, right? Like from what you said back then to now.
Yeah, so I was interested in Magic, and it was my favorite hobby through most of my like adolescent life. And then when I was getting to the end of high school, I bought into Moto, and that spiked that kind of hit a spark,
Yeah,
I
for sure.
started playing Show and Tell decks while Dig Through Time was legal. I was playing that Omnitel deck nonstop. It was really fun. And then at one point, I don't really remember when I made the change. I do remember watching a lot of coverage matches of people playing Storm, and I'd watch Caleb Schur and Rodrigo Tagores, and they're just outplaying everyone left and right. And then you watch a coverage match, and it's some random guy, and it's a name you've never heard of that's in the feature match, and they're playing the deck, and it kind of gives a little bit of hope that this guy I've never heard of is also winning with the deck. It's not. There was this big aura of, you must put in 10,000 hours before you can even goldfish the deck. And that's just nowhere near true. But when you are spectating someone playing the deck and you yourself have never picked it up, it looks like the gap from you and them is monstrous. But there's really that 20% of the work gets 80%. That 80-20 rule would apply, I think, in this.
So, what would you recommend for someone who's trying to pick up Storm Combo for the first time if they were actually starting Legacy today?
Uh, I, I would pick up an ad nauseum tendrils list, not the Epic Storm list, because the Epic Storm list requires a lot of format knowledge. You need to know where your windows open and when they close, and that varies based on decks you're against. For example, if you're against an Ancient Tomb deck, they might just slam a Karn and you lose. Um, I would pick a very stock list. I would play it versus yourself a bunch. I would try to play it online, record matches. I like to record even when I play because the replay tool on Magic Online hasn't been very good for most of the time I've played on the client.
So, get into Magic Online is one of those things,
Get into
basically,
Magic
right?
Online, talk to people about it. If you're playing it at your weeklies, ask people. Don't be results oriented. That's extremely important. Understand that variance is okay. You like Magic is a game of variance. Storm is a deck of variance. Sometimes you need to accept volatility in order to win. You need to build the decision making skills and be comfortable losing to variance, but also not try to jack up volatility just for fun.
Yeah.
I've coached people on Storm. Some people, they try to ad nauseam every window they get. Some people are deathly afraid of it because what if I die? Well, then you die. And then you click join next match and you try again. That's what happens.
Hmm. So, what would you recommend to someone who's like gone past the sort of basics and the goldfishing and maybe have played a number of matches? Like, how do they get to a little bit of a higher level? Because I guess I can just speak from personal experience, right? Like, I picked up ad nauseam tendrils at some point in my legacy career, if you could call it that. Like, I think
Yeah.
I played it when Shardless Bug was one of the most dominant decks, and basically you got free wins or match wins against that deck when that was a dominant deck. I even remember playing. I even remember playing it at a GP, a legacy GP, I think. But what I found was like when it was hard for me to like. I don't know how to phrase the question exactly. It's more like I hit a point where I sort of felt like I plateaued, where I knew kind of the basics, but I was never able to do better than maybe like 6-2 or like 5-3 in a tournament. Like I'm wondering if you have advice for people who are wanting to get over that hill or get over that bump.
Yeah, well, the first thing I would remember is that 6-2 and 5-3 are actually pretty darn good records. um, and in a single tournament, there is an absurd amount of variance that occurs. No one will win a GP unless they got extremely lucky. It doesn't matter if they're terrible or amazing, if they're playing the best deck or the worst deck. You got extremely lucky for that to happen. Um, I would say it is always important to, when they're thinking, make sure you're thinking, because your deck takes a good amount of thought. Don't think of the game as this is my game plan. Think of it as decision trees. This is the most desirable plan, but my opponent can interact with me. If they interact with me this way, this next decision tree is the best one. If they interact with me a different way, this is the best. Thinking of just all the micro decisions, like when you ponder, if you're planning on pondering, keeping a card and shuffling, you might think the order of the next two cards are irrelevant, but it's not. There are scenarios where you decide that you don't want to fetch. There are scenarios you don't get to fetch. There are scenarios that you float a card on top and you get surgicaled and you wish you floated it differently. There are lots of decisions that seem almost irrelevant, but in the long term for your growth of a player, they're very important. So I would say considering decisions even when you don't think they're relevant at all, even when they aren't relevant at all, it is still good practice, like how you sequence your spells. There's a certain order that you want to play your rituals. There's certain sequencing decisions when going off. A lot of times there's like an all paths lead to Rome kind of thing going on. And it really doesn't matter what you do. And if you miss sequence in those spots, there's no chance. Like if you're just playing against a Death and Taxes player and they're tapped out and they have no hate bears in play, it does not matter what you do as long as you put a tendrils on the stack at the end.
Mm-hmm.
But it's
Yeah.
good to think about, well, if they have a Fairy Macabre, should I sequence this way so that I don't lose Threshold?
Mm-hmm.
If they have a Mindbreak Trap, how do I lose the least possible amount of resources?
Mm. That's often what I found to be the hardest when I was playing the deck was that you needed to always have a lot of mental horsepower computing all the time because you're always trying to think about what they could have or what they're most likely to have, right? Like you said, like even if they're tapped out, maybe they have a surgical, or maybe they have a fairy macabre, maybe I mean surgical is a terrible example as we know, but you know things could happen. So you're trying to figure out, or I guess these days it's like what do they have a veil of summer or something, right? So
Yeah.
you're trying to figure out like what are all the possible things that they could have, and what I found to be challenging for me at least in the past was like I have this tendency to sometimes like overthink what they might have and then almost like play too conservatively. So I'm wondering if you have like advice for that as well. It's like where you're trying to play around everything because it's kind of like a hallmark of a Magic player, right?
Oh man, I absolutely do. So I have a friend in poker that also plays for a living. And we talk about in poker, hand reading is a skill that kind of applies to Magic. If you're playing against a blue-white opponent and they miss their second land drop, you can hand read that they probably have 7 spells in their hand. That's not too difficult. Similarly, if you're in game 3 versus Delver, which is the tempo archetype, and they don't lead on a creature, you're probably not going to want to just fire off your combo into the Abyss because they probably have 7 interactive spells if they kept a hand without a threat. because in that matchup you're favored in the long run. So if they kept to hand, and then there's this whole critical thinking. It's not so much of a math thing as it is logic and thinking about every decision they do does give you a little piece of info and applying all those little pieces of info. So when you're concerned about them having a force or a surgical or a fluster storm, consider things like, did they delay on a threat? Did they play their Delver on turn 2 instead of turn 1? Did they ponder shuffle 4 times? Because there's a good chance they got nothing.
Yep.
What windows did they have to take actions and chose not to? What windows did they take actions instead of holding up interaction? Thinking about all the little pieces of info that they give you without meaning to. And one of my poker friends, we talk about the whole range of hands they can have, but in his head, he really focuses on, well, these are the strongest hands they can have, and if they have those, I can lose all my money. But they can also have all of the nonsense that is just total nothing. They can have the bluffs, they can have the middling parts of their hands, they can have... There's more than just the existence of them having the nutted 5-card interactive hand. That is something they can have, but it's more likely they have 2 or 3 pieces of interaction. And sometimes they have none.
Mm-hmm. Or sometimes they have the nuts, and if you figure it out that they have the nuts, then you're not winning anyway, so you kind of have to move forward on the assumption that they don't, or something to that effect, right?
Yeah, absolutely. If you can't beat it, why play around it?
Yeah. Yeah, it's just there's just so many intricacies with Storm, and I'm just wondering, like, what keeps you involved in playing this archetype? Like, what makes it interesting for you? I feel like you sort of already touched on some of the answers, but I kind of want to hear it straight from you.
I really like trying new cards when they come out, just in case they stick. This new Pair of Dice Lost card is absurd. It's the most broken card I've seen in this deck since maybe ever since I've been playing the deck. And we do have the shell for
Really,
it to come around.
I've got to say, Lurrus has got to be in there, right? I think you were playing
sorry.
Lurrus
Excuse me. You're
free
correct.
errata companion when every deck was playing Lurrus for free, right?
You're absolutely correct. I forgot about that because mine got banned before I got my life copy. I did play a whole lot of that on Magic Online.
Yeah.
That was a whole different deck. You know, you're cutting preordains for baubles. You're sideboarding dead weights because it's just a lawnmower versus death and taxes.
That was just such a special period of Magic, like when Storm decks were running Lurrus, right? Because it's basically free, I guess, for most decks.
The very first
Beyond
time
free.
I booted up a league, way beyond free. The very first time I booted up a Stormless with Lurrus, I had a turn 1 kill that could not have been a turn 1 kill without Lurrus. Because I needed the extra 2 Storm of play Lurrus, bring back LED, crack it. And it's just free. It's just free to do that.
Yeah. Unfortunately I didn't play Storm during that time, but I did see you might have been streaming or you might have posted something about Lurrus, or maybe it was like Cyrus or one of you guys, and it was just absurd to even hear about that.
I'm sure I tweeted a bunch about it when it came out. Another helpful thing is Jataxian Probe. When I started playing Storm, Jataxian Probe was legal. And man, is it much easier to learn just what hands look like over the course of the game. Mm-hmm. If you can just see their hand. It's become so much easier to play without Probe if you started playing with Probe. So maybe testing with someone, and if you can do Magic Online testing and see their side, I really like seeing both sides. It's something we do in poker too, is when you study a spot, you want to study both sides, because you don't just want to know what you're doing, you want to know how they're supposed to react. So, right. Remember how I mentioned Cyrus and I are we're playing garbage matches at like 4 a.m. Sometimes we'd swap decks and be like, oh my god, what have you done here?
So,
I found that helps.
I know you've already kind of touched on it, but I want to know, like, how did you guys start playing poker? I know you've been full-time for a while, but even just getting into the game, competitive poker, like how did that happen for you?
I'm sure I played a bunch with my friends for 0 stakes, as you do as a kid, because it sounds fun. And that was probably how I learned the rules of the game. The first real involvement point of poker in my life, I remember the day I was supposed to be. I'm a senior in college. So set the scene. I'm a senior in college. I'm a double major. I was on dean's list for 2 years, and my grades are starting to slip because my classes are getting tougher. I'm getting more and more credits. I'm
By the way,
sitting
what is your
in.
study? What did you double major in?
I doubled in jazz studies and applied mathematics.
So you're a jazz musician as well.
I am a jazz musician. I still do perform jazz. I still do that as part of my income too.
Okay, what instrument do you play?
I play drums. I started playing in elementary school, did all the school programs up to that, and I really got a desire for it in high school. It was enough to make me start to put more of my energy into music than sports. Um, then in high school, there's all these programs like honor bands and then um, advanced after school kind of course things for music for the more interested students, the ones that really want to do it in college. And although I wasn't one of those, a lot of my friends were. And so I kind of joined them and got more of a desire for music in high school.
Okay,
And then
I know this is totally sidetracking from what you were going to say, but what are your thoughts around the movie Whiplash?
oh, it's a pretty good film in my opinion. Um, some parts of it aren't very accurate.
Very
The
exaggerated, one
professor,
might say.
yeah, but the professor screaming, that is something I have seen and witnessed. Not in my ensembles. Like my college classes, all the professors were great. None of them were abusive or anything. But I have seen and heard stories of things that serious. A lot of there's old stories of bebop musicians getting cymbals thrown at their head and stuff, like from the movie that one. That stuff does happen. And a lot of the musicians, they want it really, really, really badly. It is, if you are not willing to be a martyr of music, it is a hard industry to succeed in. Communication, of course, is very important. If you're trying to go down the world class route, say, I want to be part of the San Francisco Orchestra, that's going to be different than I want to get as much middle level work as possible and make a living. Those are kind of two different approaches for a musician. You can be the well-rounded guy that can do everything and he's very good at communicating and he secures gigs and he has backups and he has connections, or you can be the maestro prodigy approach as a musician. Um I didn't want that much of music to that degree at that point in my life.
Mm-hmm.
I One of the toughest things was me as a musician just being, cream of the crop where I came from, and then I go to a university and everyone around it wants it as much as me or more, and they can't get practice time because all the practice rooms are filled. It's like, what is going on? Everyone is
Right.
practicing all the time.
That's true for a lot of disciplines, right? Like when you grow up and you do something, you love it. You're probably like big fish in a small pond, and then you get to the next level, literally, and it's just like everybody wants it just as much, and there maybe some of them are more talented than you. Like it's just like a whole mental adaptation, right? Not to mention
Yeah.
the practice space, as you said.
The pond feeds into the ocean and you see a shark for the first time. You're like, oh, what's this?
Yeah, and then you have to decide: am I the shark or am I the guppy? Or you got to figure that
Yeah.
out pretty quick.
Or can I hang in the middle?
Yeah. So yeah, sorry. Going back to what you were saying, like you were doing your double major
Oh, yeah.
senior year, and
I'm a double major in music and math, and I have a 5,000 word paper on Beethoven due the next day. And I have done lots of research. I have not done much of the actual paper. And I'm sitting in the cafeteria and I start writing. I decide to take a break and I play around a storm on my laptop in the cafeteria. And then a weird spot comes up. Someone messages me about sideboarding. I decided that I didn't have a definitive written out sideboard guide. I know how I sideboard in like 90% of matchups. I haven't ever taken pen to paper and written it out for something to publish. So that kind of sparked me to just write this massive sideboard guide. And I ended up writing like a 7,000 word sideboard guide instead of my
instead of the
5,000 word
5,000 word
paper.
Beethoven
Yeah,
paper.
and I wrote this fat sideboard guide and I just put it out for free. And it was extremely popular. And one of the people that messaged me and said they really liked it, or one of the people that followed me and left a comment on it, is a guy named Jonathan Little. And he is was
A poker
formerly,
player, right? Yeah.
yes, he is a poker player, but he was formerly, he's a big Magic fan. He was a very high
He's really into
rated,
magic as
apparently
well.
there were, yeah, apparently there used to be global rankings for Legacy and Vintage, and he was highly ranked in Vintage. But he followed me. I started going through. I followed him back. I watched some of his stuff that he published. I checked out his free stuff. He checked out my stuff. I was very interested when someone of a, it's not every day that someone with 50K, 100,000 followers likes my random paper that I posted while I'm in the cafeteria.
Hmm.
I checked out his stuff. Um, remember thinking, oh, this is interesting. I'm going to save it and check it out later. And then I remember I was doing a musical gig locally, and just on all the downtime, I was going through all his free stuff. He had like two books that were about 100 pages each that were free, just publicly out there's a PDF. I read them both. I got a free trial on his training site. I could start to see the overlaps of what I understand from Magic start to overlap, like the really general game theory concepts.
Hmm. Hmm.
And something sparked, and I just kind of took off. I got a subscription to his site. I started playing extremely. I was playing 2 cent, 4 cent stakes online, which is a $4 buy-in maximum game, which is for poker. It's on the pretty small side.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, just so I could get going. You don't want to play for no money because people will just go all in for fun, and you won't learn anything. You might learn the rules of the game, but that's about it.
Hmm.
And so
What happened
I
to
kind of
what happened to the Beethoven paper? Did you finish it?
maybe not.
But
I might
you
not have finished that paper.
did you like decide to stop college, or did you still end up graduating from your getting your two double majors?
Um, I I did end up dropping out, but it wasn't that semester. It was the following semester when COVID started. All of our classes became electronic. Learning music electronically is a little difficult. Having the incentive to go to a GE class that I had zero interest in,
Hmm.
also harder from online.
Hmm.
I kind of just really lost all the desire that I had. I had a lot of desire my freshman, sophomore year, and then I kind of just got ground down. GEs were really, really tough for me to balance. When you have a music class that is 1 unit or 2 units, but it takes up 15, 20 hours a week at least. And then on top of that, I have this 4 unit GE that's taking up less time, but I have even less desire for it.
Hmm.
It I wasn't very good at playing the American education system game. I would definitely just take classes that I wanted, and I would show up to the ones that I wanted and try to scrape by in the GE kind of things that I didn't care about. And honestly, my professors in the GE classes just thought that their class was the most important thing in the world. Every professor probably thinks their class is the most important class,
Sure.
But when you have this system where everyone takes classes they like and then they have to take classes they don't like, you might understand that though, that the vast majority of your students are like, that's just your scenario.
So on a scale of 1 to 10, how much should poker have to do with you ultimately dropping out?
Probably an 8 or a 9, pretty high up there. I I wasn't just missing class to miss it. I was missing class because I had things that were grabbing my attention more than that. I wasn't just being lazy at home. Sometimes that thing was magic though, and it probably shouldn't have been.
Hmm. Hmm.
But a lot of times, so when COVID started, my daily regimen was go to classes or don't that are online, have my coffee, open up a training thing on Jonathan Little's site. I spent about 2 hours for about 6 months or so. The whole last semester. So let's see, that was March through June, and then 2 months after. So 5 months, I think. I spent about 5 months just taking myself to poker college, kind of. I just was a college student, not doing college work, and I was
That was
studying
your
poker.
your real education. Yeah.
That was kind of what I was doing. I spent a lot of time before I had money to play studying. I
Hmm.
I started by playing really, really small stakes, and I couldn't beat those, and that was very irritating to me because I'm
So you
putting in all
basically
this
thought it
work.
was going to be easier, right?
I thought it would be no, I didn't think it would be easier. I thought that my adversaries would not be as tough,
Mm.
and then I ended up finding out that it wasn't that I wasn't winning; it's that the rake is very high, and the sites just take a very large percent out of the pot. When the stakes of the game are small, the house doesn't care if you're playing small stakes or huge stakes. It's the same cost for them to operate no matter what stakes are being played.
Yeah.
When you get to higher stakes, there might be um, difficulty in moving money around. Those aren't stakes that I'm going to be playing. I'm playing $4 buy-in, $10 buy-in cash games, and struggling because of the rake, not because of the players are too tough. It's because every 100 hands they take about 10 big blinds. And if I'm winning at 8 big blinds, it looks like I'm losing 2, but I'm really winning 8 big blinds per 100 hands. And that's
Yeah.
a win rate you can live off of if you're in the right stakes.
It's like financial investing where the fund takes such a high rake from the management fees that it just wipes out your gains, right? Or you have to go
Yeah,
like
but
above and beyond just to keep above water. So that can be really tough.
you can't
So
just win. You have
was that
to.
the main driver for you to like, move up in stakes? I'm trying to figure out how that progression went for you.
No, it was the main driver for me to study and put a whole lot of work into my game.
Hmm.
Um, I remember just I'd wake up, have breakfast, go to my class, have coffee. I'd sit down. I would spend 2 hours basically studying one hand. I would say, okay, so they're here, I'm here, I should have these hands, they should have these hands. Then when the board comes out based on the actions that have happened, I'm going to manually write out all of the hands I can have and all of the hands they can have. And then when they take an action, that's going to filter because some of my hands will do different things. Kind of like what I was saying that when they don't play something on turn one, it's more likely they're holding something up. You can deduce little things, and that's how Jonathan Little teaches you to think about the game. And it's a really good way to think about the game. It's like a process of elimination. And I would spend time just studying the spots, learning the heuristics. I spent probably more time on my own game before I started playing than anyone in my player pool.
Hmm.
Um, I do think that me choosing to dive into it with no backup plan, really. I did, when I did finally drop out, I had a very awkward phone call with my mom. Told her, Mom, I don't want to finish this. What I want to do is play poker, and I want to do this for a living, and I know I can. And that obviously didn't go well. She tried nonstop to get me to just finish so I have my degree.
Yeah.
I made a deal with her that if things aren't good in a year, I'll go back and finish.
Hmm.
But I took that year off, and having that year window for me to prove myself in a strategy game, I knew I wanted to do something in the strategy realm. I had that realization at one point that strategy's just, if I could make a living as a strategist, that's what I want to do. There's nothing that brings me more satisfaction when I complete. There's nothing that I have more drive for. There just isn't something that will inspire me as much as looking at two strategies and how they interact.
So
It
when you're playing an instrument or you're working through a math problem, it doesn't give you the same kind of satisfaction or engagement.
Music does give a kind of similar one. There's a conversation being had. That's what I really like about jazz is
The
the
interplay, right?
conversation.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, that's my favorite part of the jazz realm is the musicians interacting between each other. On a chart, everyone's played 400 times, but it's these four musicians playing it, and they've played it 100 times with each other, with other people, by themselves. But every time it comes up, it's something new and
It's
beautiful.
always unique. Yeah, yeah. Okay. But you still, I mean, I guess all things considered, you think strategy is like what you want to do, like or you want to spend most of your time doing, right?
It's just what comes to my brain the most. It's what I just,
Okay.
yeah, it's my passion. It's just strategy.
So you
I
tell
like to
your
find
mom,
strategy in.
you give yourself the 1 year ultimatum, and then what happens?
Um, I give her a 1 year ultimatum. I propose that I pull some money out of my life savings account. I had an inheritance from my dad. He passed away when I was in high school. Um, I wanted to pull a percent of that out to take my shot, and she said, "No way in hell you're going to get a job." It's like, okay, I guess I'll get a job. Where do I get a job? How about a casino? I go to the casino. I'm very interested in getting a job in the poker room. At this point, I've played live poker 2 or 3 times, and it has not gone well because there are two important things in poker. You find a game you can beat, and then you have enough money to play it. I didn't have enough money to play it. So I'd have about 2 buy-ins to my name of at least money I can afford to lose. And I remember one time I got it in good and lost, and it was just heartbreaking to me. And I'm like, okay, I can't do this clearly until I have more money. Even though I've been playing online for micro stakes and seeing this happen, it's for 2% of the size. This really hurts. I understand I need to get a job now.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's you can't play well if you don't have a bankroll because your risk of it, if you're a professional, you can't go broke. Like, what are you gonna do?
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up working in soft count, which is the room in the back of the casino where you count all the money because it was just what was hiring. I wanted to work in the poker room at first, but there weren't spots available. So I ended up working soft count. This was a rough job. It is 2:45 a.m. to 10:45 a.m. 5 days a week, but you're never over at 10:45 a.m. You're over when all the money is counted. So the job would be show up at 2:40, put on this jumpsuit that has no pockets or anything. You get in a room with your fingerprint, and then you swipe a badge, and then you call security, and they open the door, and then they check your shoes. And you have to shake your jacket for surveillance before you put it on. And then you go in this recorded room with 100 cameras and 45 microphones that is the size of most people's living rooms. And then you go.
This is basically like the scene in Breaking Bad when Jesse and Walter, they get hired help to work the meth lab, where
At the start of the day, no, but then at the end, once you go to the slot machines, you pull the briefcase of money out, you put an empty briefcase in, and then you do that for all the machines. You take them in the back. Security brings the ones from table games, and then you grab a big handful of money, you put it through a fat money counter, and it goes, and then it sorts them by bill, and then it stops, and you strap it, and you throw it on the table, and then at the end of the day, at 11 a.m., there's that giant scene of $4, $5, $10 million, whatever it was for the day, just on the table. And if you're a dollar off, you all stay and recount it until you find it. There's a no variance policy tolerance, I guess.
What's the craziest thing that ever happened in that job for you? Either to you or something you've witnessed. That you're allowed to talk about, I guess.
Yeah. I didn't sign any NDAs, so I can talk about so there's this procedure that happens when you drop money. If money touches the ground, just because they have all these procedures just to ensure if you do everything procedurally that we say, if money's missing, we know you didn't touch it. So you just follow their procedure and you're protected. One of the procedures is if money's dropped, you yell money down, everyone puts their hands up in the air, and whoever dropped it calls surveillance. And then security comes, picks it up, and then you all clear your hands, and then you resume work. We had a guy drop $500,000 and just start, it's his first day. He carrying $500,000, and they're in bricks, right? It's a rubber band. You have a strap of 100 bills, and then you band it. And if you have
you're not
5
gonna have
straps,
that
you
scene
break it.
you're not gonna have bills floating in the air or anything, right?
Yeah, you're not gonna just take money, throw it up. But he dropped it, and how it hit the counter, one of them just popped. And then almost every time you drop money, it's something somewhat secure, or it's one loose bill. This was the first time I've just seen $500,000, some chunk of it floating around the room empty, and the guy starts picking it up, and everyone's like, no, and he's like, yes, pick it up. And what we do is we say money down, and he's like, no, no, money up. And he keeps reaching to pick it all up. But he was new. That was I'm like, it's the first time I'm going to have to stay like 12 hours or something.
Yeah. Okay, well,
Oh, and
hopefully,
then,
so it got rectified, but it took 12 hours.
yeah. The other thing is when you need a guest to cash out of a machine so you can swap the empty case of money with the full one that's in the machine and they refuse to. That's happened a couple times. Some guests just will not leave their slot machine. And you just call security and they basically just will eventually drag them out if they don't.
Is that
So,
some sort of like superstition, or they just don't want to leave the machine, or they're just so into it they just don't ever want to leave, or what?
so of people that play slots, most of them are logical. Most of them are people that are just gambling with extra money for fun. Some of them are problem gamblers. Some of them have some mental thing going on. I did have one guy when I was trying to pull him out. He goes, "You can't touch my machiney weenie," and he starts stroking the machine. And I'm not going to talk to this person anymore. Something really bad might happen. So some of the guests, there's either from loss or from expectation, something happens and sets them up in their brain that
Yeah.
it's just best not to interact.
Hmm.
So I think it might have just been someone that's lost it.
Hmm. Okay, so you're working the back room, and did you do that for a whole year as you were like just grinding poker, or what?
I did it. So I would work my 10:45 or sorry, my 2:45 a.m. shift until it's done, which would be around 11 or noon. Then I would go to the poker room. I would play a 1-3 game.
Hmm.
Um, my buy-in started really small, and then as I got more, I'd buy in for more and more. And I would just play poker kind of like how I was grinding Moto. I would work a 10-hour shift. I'd play poker for 4 or 5 hours, go home, shower, sleep, rinse, repeat. I did that for about 3 months until I built up enough money to have a bankroll. Um, I didn't quit my job because I still have life expenses and stuff, but I did transfer to the poker room as a cashier. I met all the dealers. I got a little more familiar. That job was so much more relaxing than the money count job. Is You really do learn how to execute procedure with that job. You learn this is how money's supposed to be spread. This is how chips are supposed to be spread. You learn the casino industry very well if you start there. And then I remember the first day I was in the poker room, I dropped like a chip and I just did this, and I was like, "What are you doing? You just pick it up." And it's different. It's we're not
You're
in.
expecting some sort of long procedure, or with your
Yeah,
hands up or something. Yeah.
yeah. So I transferred there, became a cashier. I did that for about 9 months while I was still playing. People that worked there started to realize that I had a clue what I was doing in poker. I was always a little scared to become a dealer because of the there's a little bit of tension when you play where you work. You might leave a bad taste in someone's mouth and then they might not tip you as well. Um, if you have a weird interaction, you really don't want the house to rule in your favor because it might look like some sort of bias, so they normally won't. But then that means when something awkward comes up, like you might get the butt end of it, where if you played somewhere else, you might be treated a little more equally. So I was a little worried about that. And I talked to some of the dealers that play, and it was clear that they're not trying to play for profit, but they all said that it wasn't as big of a deal. So I gave it a shot. Some little things did come up, but most of them didn't care. Most of the players just understand a dealer's a dealer, a player's a player, especially in the games that I was playing.
Hmm. What do you mean, especially in the games that you're playing? Because there were smaller stakes, or because of the people you knew that were regulars, or what?
I think partially the regular where I was at, there were a whole lot of dealers that were also players. Like our poker room had a very high percentage of staff that played on their days off. So
Mm.
it was a much more common thing. There was every once in a while there's some guest that shows up, and I try not to mention that I work there unless it comes up in conversation. I did have one spot where one guy thought one guy made some absurd accusation that, you know, it's rigged. It's like everyone's just accusing that the house is rigged. And he ended up just basically trying to hunt for comps, what the manager told me. He's like, this guy's just hunting for comps, you know?
Just
But
trying to
sometimes
make up
things do get
whatever
awkward.
fabrications or excuses. Yeah.
Yeah. And anyone, for anyone out there that thinks any form of gambling is rigged, if you're playing at some underground house game, it could be. But all that these large companies need to do to make millions per day is not rig it. The slot machine isn't rigged. It's rigged by nature because it pays out less than you put in.
Right.
But it's not rigged to pay you. It's like in poker, the house doesn't care who wins or loses. They just care that X hands per hour happen. And as long as X hands per hour happen, they don't have incentive to... They don't need to ever rig any sort of game. But when you go through a long stretch of loss or a long stretch of winning, it's hard to process what is variance versus what is reality. There's an old saying that Daniel Negreanu had in an interview, which is, if you flip a coin 20 times and it lands heads all 20 times, what's the probability that it will land heads on the next flip? And most people say it's 50-50. Some people say, well, it's bound to be tails, which it's 50-50, but Daniel's response was, it's 100% because the coin's rigged, and you should figure that out by the 20th flip, that it's rigged, because some things are improbable and some things are astronomically improbable. And it's important to realize the difference between those. Like, you can lose 10 hands in a row. You can lose 18 out of 20. You know, but sometimes you need to open your eyes and ask, why is this happening? And most of the time, it's just variance.
It's such a fascinating field because I feel like playing poker or just going to casinos to gamble, in some ways, you should become more aware of probability and odds and cheating and rigged versus non-rigged. But on the other hand, there are lots of people who are in that scene who almost like deliberately choose not to care about these things. It's this weird like world where you have these highly rational like math people in it, and I think you're probably in that category because you understand these things. But there's also people who are just like outright degenerates that are just like, I just want to throw money around, and it's like this weird thing where these two worlds like mingle all the time. I'm not sure if I've described it well, but it's just a really weird pool of like people in there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, first off, anyone that plays for a living is probably a degenerate to some level.
That's
You know, you can't make it if you're not, to some degree, willing to jump on the volatility
degree of
wagon.
irrationality in there already, baked in there. Yeah.
Yeah. I do think a lot of people at the poker table care about things other than if they won or lost, other than if they played it well. There is a whole bunch of false positives being thrown around. People will take actions and get the result they wanted, not knowing that they played it horribly.
Yep.
And they will get... There's a lot of... I shouldn't say false positives. I should say
or
false
just weird
verification.
heuristics. Yeah.
A lot of people, they will play poorly and get rewarded for it, much more so than in Magic. So I feel that this game has more variance than Magic because there are more people getting away with playing suboptimally in this game. There's a whole lot of just... I would say almost half of the feedback you get is just wrong. Like, if you put your money in good and you lose, that might be some feedback that your thoughts might have been wrong. Like, you're trying to decide if you can go all in with a straight and they snap call you and they have a full house. If you look at that one instance in a vacuum, you might think, okay, well, I shouldn't go all in with straights on this board because they could have a full house. People will miss value because of that, even though, like, the full... Like, when I said... I was talking about my friend focusing on only one part. That is a possibility of things that can happen, but it's just here. There's all this other stuff that can happen too. So a lot of players feel that they're better at poker than they are because they keep doing the same bad things and it works for them.
Hmm.
You'll see people vastly overplay hands and everyone will fold and they'll think that's a win, but really they were about to take someone's entire stack and let the guy off the hook and they don't realize it.
Right.
And I think that's part of what keeps poker alive is there are people that think they're playing right and there aren't. There are also people that just want other people to know that they got unlucky or they got a bad beat or they got this hand and it didn't hold.
Yeah.
Lots of times people will take a certain action
That
to
that social aspect
show
of
that.
being able to tell the story about it is almost as important for some people as the actual winning and losing, right?
Yeah. Well, here's the thing: is that everyone Magic. There is like recreational players. There are winning and losing players in Magic, but for the most part, everyone that's there wants to have fun, and that's their incentive. Some people care more about winning than fun. Some people care more about fun than winning, and that might be where you draw the line. In poker, we call them like regs, like regular players, and recs for recreationals. And there's like a reg and a rec dynamic that kind of happens where if you're the reg, you care about winning money as your primary factor. And if you're the rec, you care about having fun. So if you're the reg and you're winning, you probably want to make sure that other guy has fun so that transaction keeps happening.
Right.
There's like different forms of EV, and the EV I'm gaining is money, and the EV you're gaining is entertainment.
Right. Right. For some people, it's like going to a movie. It's just like entertainment dollars. For other people, it's like yourself, it's income. But that interesting mix, right, where you have to not get these people to quit because they need to come back because you need to farm them the next day or the next week or whenever, right? So
Yeah.
because you can't
Try
just
not
have
to
all
think
regs
about
play
it
against each
as
other. There's obviously a kind of like zero something with poker for sure, right? But it's just you can't always think about it.
yeah. At the end of the day, it is a zero sum game. You know. Um.
So how do you decide to play live poker versus online poker? Is there something inherent to playing like sitting down and playing less hands per hour that's just like better ultimately for your bankroll or whatever it is?
Yeah. So when I was playing online, I was one of the advantages of playing online is one, you got to be at your home and play. Two, you can open multiple tables at once. I'm sure everyone's at least seen a clip of someone playing 10, 12, 24 tables. That's something you can do. Um, my decision skills I found dropped drastically after four, so I just kept it to four. And if you're playing online and you're playing, let's say you're on a site that gets out about 80 hands per hour on a single table. If you got four tables, that's 320 hands an hour. Live poker averages around 30 to 35. So I was getting 10 times the volume online, which is a big deal. But when you play live, the games are so much softer. When you're playing online, as soon as you hit any real stakes, the vast majority of the players have some clue of at least how the game should go. Like pre-flop, like most of my hands should raise to this amount, and this player should either call or fold or raise to this other amount. And they understand these like play pattern kind of things.
Mm.
But live poker, they have their own play patterns that are unique to the small stakes games, unique to this kind of camaraderie aspect that happens, even though we're in a zero sum game. There's still a little bit of give and take. People buy people beers all the time at the table, and it's not like a malicious, I want to get you drunk so that I take your money kind of thing. It's normally not, even though
It's
people
just more
think it's.
social, basically.
Yeah, and there's the social aspect, and you want to make sure they're in some essence the losing players are your customers. You want to make sure they're having a good time. When you start to get to higher and higher stakes, the recreational players, they run the game. They choose, okay, we want to do a bomb pot. We want to do an orbit of PLO. We want a straddle. We want a double straddle. We want. Sometimes they're like, we want an ocean card. We want like one more card at the end.
Yeah. Yeah. We want to play the seven deuce game or whatever it
Yeah, we
is.
want to
Yeah.
play the seven deuce game. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so true. And I think for me, that's kind of like a parallel to Magic Online because when I first started playing Magic, up until probably 2020, I had never played Magic Online. When we interacted, I think in GPs or SCGs or wherever, when I was in the US, I realize now, going looking back, that I was such a fish. I was basically like dead money in those GPs or events, and I had fun. Like I was one of the what you call the Rex, right? I was a fun. I had fun playing recreationally, but when I started playing Magic Online over the last couple years, it's just night and day, man. Like just getting those reps and just like playing against good players all the time, even in leagues or whatever. Like my game leveled up so fast in like 6 months of playing Magic Online compared to like 10 years of playing Magic on paper. Like it was unbelievable, and I started to see the results. Like honestly, after started playing Magic Online, going to paper events, like it was just night and day. Like I felt like my God, I was like living in a cave like the last 10 years, and that's how I felt when I played online poker too. Like I leveled up so quickly, and I didn't actually end up doing what you did, which is go full time poker. But I have such a better understanding of fundamentals just from grinding like those few months or year or two, like playing like micro stakes on online,
Hmm.
that I feel like everyone should just do that. And I just feel like the parallel is that, like, honestly speaking, like the paper tournaments in Magic are just so much softer than like playing a challenge or playing even a league. It's just it's like it's the same game, but it's not really the same game. So I totally understand what you're saying. Like you could probably just make more playing offline, right, for poker. It's not the
Yeah.
same game.
I have a question for you. Do you think that Magic Online and Live Magic, do they feel like two separate games to you?
They don't really, and I would say this because I feel like playing Magic Online. I'm not going to speak for Arena. I tried Arena, never really got into it. Um, you really learn like what real Magic is, right? Like the stack, how things work, how to play technically tight. And I also feel like online and offline Magic are similar because people way overrate things like hand reading and what like bluffing and things like that in Magic. Where I feel like in Magic, like 80% of the time, if you just play ABC Magic, like sure, you got to think about what your opponents might have, but if you just play the same way online versus offline, you'll still get pretty decent results. I'm not talking about like, oh, you do this and you can like be a pro tour level player, but like when it comes to just grinding SCGs or whatever, like local, large scale regional events, like just playing the way you play on Magic Online does it like 80% of the time. That's my belief. And this is validated from speaking to grinders, players, like people who have done it basically through this interview.
Yeah.
So,
I definitely feel that you get a more technical understanding of the game when you play on Magic Online because you can't ever miss a trigger. You can't do things out of sequence. The client won't allow you to do that.
right.
I feel that they're kind of the same game, but also not. Online and live poker kind of feel like that too. Um, Online poker, I don't feel like I am exchanging EV with like a recce player in some sort of way. Um, on Magic Online, I mean, you've seen the endless salt photos through Twitter that have happened on the years. A
Oh, I
lot of
mean,
players very
it's happened to
clearly
me.
aren't trying
So
to.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
Yeah, a
it's
lot of
fun.
yeah. You've posted your own. I've seen a couple. You
Uh,
post a few actually. Yeah.
there's some good ones.
But yeah, no one like you were saying about no one is bluffing in Magic. Now, how could you bluff in Magic? You can attack and represent a combat trick or something like that. You can on turn 4 make an attack that looks
Yeah,
dumb,
you can
but
you can
you're
attack your
representing
two
a
two
hero
into their three
charge.
three, and like if they're a high level player, they'll actually think about it. It's similar to poker, right? Like you can't bluff someone
Yeah.
who's a fish, so it's like you would never do that if 99% of the time they would just block. But there is some high level play, but it doesn't happen super often. So
Yeah, there is so I do think it's different also because like the clock system works differently. On Magic Online, you have a chess clock. If I want to spend 4 minutes resolving a brainstorm, I can, god damn it. Right? That was probably also helpful for me learning the deck, being allowed 4 minutes to resolve a brainstorm.
yeah,
The fact that you can't miss a trigger, you can't try to bait someone into things, you can't, like you said, just playing ABC gets the job done because you're going to put out a strategy that has this as your base bar, and their strategy is just going to like be based right here, and you're just going to win just because your baseline is going to be higher than theirs if you do nothing fancy.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you move to live, I've actually started playing what I would call exploitative Magic since I've been back in the game, since taking a long poker break. I played a 5K in Oakland, and funny enough, one of my poker books, one of the books I read recently was called Verbal Poker Tells, and it's him. He took 10 or so years of televised poker, analyzed like the scripts of what people said and their body languages, and it's a book of tells, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a book of tells that is its source was 10 or 20 years of televised poker. And it's really cool because he'll say the hand that happened and you can look it up if you have the ability to watch that show. But there are certain, I don't want to say theory of tells, but there are types of tells. Like there are forward tells, there are reverse tells, there are weak statement tells, there are strong statement tells. There are just actions people take if you just look at them at a baseline, what they're doing. So let's say I'm playing Storm in a GP or something, and I'm 5-1. And game one, I'm at a point where I know I'm dead, but they know I'm on Storm. They might know because it's me or because of how the game played out. I'm not in the market to try and conceal info, so I might try to go off just to collect data for them for future games.
Interesting.
Like sometimes versus Delver, if they're about to, like they have lethal on board, and I don't even have a tutor. I'm gonna like shuffle my cards. I'm gonna sequence in a way that baits them. I'm gonna cast a dark ritual, see if they would like to counter that dark ritual, see how they think, see how they respond, see how they hold their cards when they're doing that. There's kind of categories of how people respond. Some people try to stop you as soon as possible. Some people try to wait till the last second. Some people wait way too late, like they wait for tentacles on the stack.
Is way more important to know than concealing your deck or what you might do, right? Like knowing more about them means more to you as a player than what they might know about you, because they're not even looking to learn from you. So
yeah, you know what's funny is that happens in poker too. Like there will be someone that is just, they might be drunk, they might just be a crazy player, that might be their player style. They're playing 80% of their hands. They're always coming in for a raise. They're always betting the flop. They're always betting the turn. They're probably betting the river. And the way you counter it is you just trap them a bunch and you don't play garbage and you make something you hold on for your life. That is the appropriate counter to it. But a lot of these people that play that way, the low stakes players don't even know how to counter them. So they do well, even though everyone knows what they're doing. They don't realize that you have rock and I have paper and you need to play scissors. They don't understand how to make that deviation, how to exploit or counter exploit.
Yeah. So going back to what you're saying about your journey with poker, like where are you at now? Because you've gone full time, right?
I have.
Right?
That is right.
And how's that going? Like, is it
It's going pretty well, to say the least.
Okay. And it's not just because you're running good, like you figure something out, right?
Well, I track all my results so I can objectively say if I'm running good or running bad. But the hard part of live poker is because you get so few hands, an upswing or a downswing or what can be just considered under sheer variance can last way longer than online. Sometimes I'd have a downswing that online would take a week to get out of. And then if you look hand count wise, that's like 5 months of me playing live. But the players are better. And there's that thing you happen, like what you said on Magic Online, that everyone felt tough. The reason that Magic Online is so much tougher is because you get in more volume, the games go faster, all the good players can just play from their house if they want. Same thing happens in poker. Because you get more hands per hour, the bad players, they either go broke or they stop being bad. Like those are your two options. If you're losing on Magic Online and you only have 100 tickets in your account and you don't have the money to throw it in, like you're either going to play better or you're going to like lose your Moto account, you know?
Yep.
And so there's just more natural selection in any online form of a game compared to live, just because volume's like, it's a volume game, you know?
For sure.
Where I'm at right now, I was grinding 1-3 as my primary stake level. The really important thing to my success, I feel, is that I spent more time studying than playing at the start. And now I'm a little bit closer to flipping it. I used to track my study hours, but then it feels like a chore. And so much of studying I actually enjoy, where
Mm.
when I was a music student, if I'm practicing a chart and I'm stressing out about other class projects, like how much time do I really want to leave for me to get better at this chart that we're not performing for a month when I have a paper due. Then you have a rehearsal and you're behind on the rehearsal, and then you feel stressed to catch up on that. But then you have this GE class you really don't care about, but you can't afford to fail it. And there was so much more of a balancing act going on with me in college that I feel that I didn't get all I could have out of rehearsal, not rehearsal, private practice time, and
Mm.
even private instruction. I just feel like I didn't benefit from it. But when I started poker, it was what I was doing. My focus was just on that. And because I feel like I have a gist of the concepts, but I don't know how to apply them, there were a lot of light bulb moments that happened. Um, and it's really inspiring to keep going if you have these light bulb moments that happen.
Yeah, because you feel like you're learning something new, you're adjusting. It feeds into like this feeling that we are self-aware, that like we can actually self-actualize and level up, right? As the
Yeah.
cliche goes, that's just so rewarding. And actually, it's interesting the way you mentioned like school. It is like portfolio management, right? It's almost like running a business or being in charge of a department. It's like when you're in a school or you're a manager, you have to balance these different things. Like I have to like, pay my employees, I have to coach my employees, I have to do this, I have to like do paperwork, I have to do like different things. Whereas poker, it's more like a singular pursuit where there's one key performance indicator. It's like how much money are you making, and everything you're doing is trying to feed into that. So there's something more, I don't want to say pure, but there's something more like direct in terms of like what your goal is, right? Whereas like often in life, it's more about like you're balancing all these different commitments that may not have much to do with each other, but you need to balance them all, or else you will just quote unquote fail, right? You just like
Yeah.
you can't keep going unless you do it. So that that
It
that is very
is
different.
it is definitely you versus the world in that sense. And yeah, everything is budgeting, like time budgeting, financially budgeting, interest budgeting, um, budget your interactions. Like I know some people that I play with that they just love to talk about the game, and sometimes it's a little too much. And I think that it might scare the rec players if you talk about how much you know about this game. And that's why it's good to talk about it with other
Probably
people that you
probably
know are
start a
winning
YouTube
players.
channel instead or something. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And if you have that, you might find that alternative way to express that. And I get it. I love talking strategy. So many different little Facebook chat thingies
Mhm.
um with
Well,
Magic
even
and
this
poker and
conversation,
like
I can
chess
tell.
mode.
Like, I can tell you're really opening up when you're like talking about the the inner stuff about poker, right? And magic.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm just wondering, like, in terms of, okay, this is something I probably should just Google search, but like, there is this often like this school of thought that I've heard about, which is fairly new because it wasn't around when I was playing poker as much. But this idea of like GTO or like game theory optimal, is there
Hmm.
is there just like a proper optimal way to make every play now, or is that too simplistic because you still have to adapt to what your opponents are doing?
Yeah, so that's
I'm
might
looking
not
for
be
the 10-second
surprising if
answer.
I
I'm
say
just joking.
yes and no,
Yeah, it
because
depends, right? Yeah.
yeah, so GTO or game theory optimal is it's a way to find Nash equilibrium, which is a point where if you have a game and you define a game as two people or two parties making zero sum interactions. If I win, you lose. If you lose, I win. There's no exception to that. If we both lose, we tie. No one profits, no one loses. If you start with that assumption, and we also start with the assumption that I know what you're doing and you know what I'm doing, so there's no leveling war possible. It is how can I play so that you cannot win? And how can you play so that I cannot win? Or sometimes you're in a spot in poker where your baseline is lose, but your goal is to lose less. For example, when you have money in and someone raises you, or there's a pot and someone bets, you don't need to win half the time. If the pot is $200 and they bet $100, you only need to win a third of the time because you're putting in 100 to win 300, or a quarter of the time, excuse me. Someone bets pot, you need to win a third. Game theory optimal is a way to play poker that is safe and protected. And if you play a GTO approach, it might really feel like chess. I was rewatching Queen's Gambit recently, and at one point I forget the main character's name. They interview her after winning some large event, and they ask what she likes about the chessboard, and she says that it's like her own little world, and she feels safe here. And if I make a mistake, it's on myself. And that is very true in poker in the very long run. One hand, anyone can win. 10,000 hands, the better player almost always wins. And game theory optimal is a way to learn the game, because what you want to do as a player is learn how to play a pretty fundamentally sound strategy and then adjust for what they're doing incorrectly. That's how you're going to make the most money. I don't need to find the game theory amount of bluff combos on the river if this guy ain't folding. I know what the theoretical bluff combos are, though, and that's very, very important, because you want to know what the perfect strategy is and then deviate it based on your assumptions of people. But if you don't know what the best way to play is at a baseline, you're not going to know how to deviate. I had an example with a friend where he thought that he should fold more than in theory, and we're trying to discuss if he should fold this hand, which we don't think you should fold in a vacuum. He's saying, well, this guy's pretty tight, so this hand, like, it's probably a theory call, but in a vacuum, it might just be a fold. And we were both dead wrong. It's just a pure fold in a vacuum. It's just a fold. And then if you add on the fact that this guy isn't bluffing you, like, enough, it's definitely a fold. So it's important to keep studying for that reason.
A fold more. Okay.
Yeah, it goes from a fold to, oh my god, put those cards in the muck now.
Yeah.
But I think it's very important to learn GTO just so you know what is actually going on in the game. What are the mechanics? What are, I guess, like, people like to talk about math and probability in the game. I really think that that's more of a GTO study than a math thing. The only math that exists in poker is pot odds. Like, when people say there's too much math for Storm, it's like, no, this isn't math. This is you solving a puzzle. It's different from math.
Yeah, you called it logic, I think.
Logic, yeah. Poker is not math, it is logic. It does have elements of math, and I feel Storm is kind of like that the same way. But there is constant leveling going on in poker. And the thing is, most people just aren't adapting fast enough. Unless you're playing in games with your friends and, like, you know they know, and there's a lot of trying to best each other going on. Like, the old man with the coffee is probably not, if you're exploiting him by folding or you're exploiting by raising him because you know he's going to fold unless he has the nuts, he's not going to just realize you're over bluffing and put his coffee down and put his foot down and go, I call now. No, he's still afraid to call it off without the nuts. That's not
He's still
changing.
The guy with the coffee. And you mentioned, like, GTO has some big assumptions, right? Like, there's no leveling going on. Like, you can't, like,
GTO's
one up
a
the other person. Yeah. So it's almost like a default baseline margin of safety that's, like, what your starting point is, but then you have to, like, factor in real world stuff, and that guy with the coffee is not gonna magically self-actualize and figure you out or something like that.
Yeah, and game theory is based around clairvoyance, that I know your strategy and you know my strategy.
Like, and no fog of war, perfect information, all that kind of stuff.
Exactly. And if you know I'm over bluffing, then you should call me down lighter. If you know I'm under bluffing, you should fold something that is a bluff catcher. A lot of my success in poker is if there are two decisions. A lot of times, that's the other hard part about poker, is that it's really hard to end up with, like, no one can execute GTO. No one can execute a game theory optimal strategy unless you have, like, 10 big blinds in front of you. If you're 200 big blinds deep and the board's like King Jack 6, and you have Queen 10, which is a straight draw. It's like a strong drawing hand on that board you can bluff with. The correct GTO option is going to be, like, when they bet to, like, call 82% and raise 18%. And then if you're shorter, it'll change to, like, call 60 and raise 40. And you can learn these heuristics and try and play as close to it as possible. And
How do
unless
you
you're
apply that though? It's like knowing whether it's 81%,
the way you
60%.
apply it is you look at a spot and you go, okay, it's like ace 10 4. What are we doing with our ace x here? What are we doing with our tens? What are we doing with our inside straight draws? What are we doing with our backdoor hands? Or you go, what are our bluff hands? What are the value hands? What are the bluffing hands? If you look at, you can kind of build your own GTO. If you take a spot, you can build unexploitability without playing GTO. You can have a spot where, let's say I want to represent the nut flush and nothing else. And I estimate that I land on the river with 6 different nut flush hands. We call them combos in poker. It's like the way you can have 2 cards. So like if there are 4 aces in the deck, there are 6 different combinations you can be dealt ace ace. So you can have like heart spade, heart diamond, heart club.
Combos.
I'm
Okay.
getting a little too in depth. I apologize, but you can build your own indifference where if every time you bet, you lay them a price. If the pot is 500 and I bet 1,000, I bet 2 times the pot. They're risking 1,000 to win 2,500. So they need to be right 40% of the time, which means if I want to just put you in the blender, I can just have the hand 60% and bluff 40. And now I don't
Right.
care if you call or fold. If you call, you win when I have it, or I win when I have it,
Yeah.
and I lose when I don't.
You're at peace with the fact that you set up those odds so that
Yes.
the
So
yeah.
a lot of times your goal is to set up indifference if you're trying to play in a vacuum. But then if you know how people handle the situation of indifference, this is where you really start to gain clairvoyance on people
Then
and really
that gets
blender them.
interesting.
You know that when they're in flight or fight, they either fight or they flight, and you can just always have it or never have it. There
And
are
that's
some
really
people that
what
I will. Sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
and sorry, that's really what gaming or the fun of it comes down to is like when you're putting people in discomfort, right? Or you're putting them into like to make decisions they don't want to make, or you're just making them uncomfortable, period. Like that's really I don't know if that's like the path to winning, but that's like for me, that's kind of like the path in fun, right? I don't know.
Well, that sounded like your Magic Online path is just I'm going to play my game and you're going to make worse decisions than me. You're going to make more mistakes and I'm going to have a higher win rate than you at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
Hopefully it
kind
works
of
out.
true in poker. And then you start to grow from there. You start to identify places that you can grab more than your allotted share based on their mistakes and your mistakes.
Does
And
this
there's like a
mean
nonstop thing going on, you know? And
nonstop
I like it.
thing? Does this mean that someone or maybe someone already has like could one build uh the perfect poker AI or bot that just uses the GTO handbook, and would that bot become a winning player over time?
Yes, that is 100% true. If someone plays, if you have a bot is capable of playing game theory optimal. I know that because we have these tools that exist. We have tools to study the game, we have the tools, they call them solvers. You might have heard of them in chess. There's one called Stockfish that came out like a decade ago, and now Google has their Alpha Zero one. And there exist these bots in chess, and what they do is they look at decision trees and they weigh down the EV of one move versus another. Um, in poker, they can actually just look at all flop, turn, river runouts, like what is going to be the highest EV strategy, assuming you know everything you're going to do and everything I'm going to do. And I have studying like software on my computer to get better at the game. And you use it so that you can study how to play the game theory way. But you can also, if you think someone is not folding enough, you can ask it, what if they don't fold enough? What should I do? And then it's going to go, well, you bluff like a madman, of course. And you can input a certain thing and get what a solver really is doing at the end of the day is it is taking one strategy and saying, how can I counter it as hard as possible? What is the most profitable? How can I exploit you as hard as possible? And this guy goes, how can I counter exploit you hard as possible? And they go back and forth until they find an equilibrium. But then if you assume someone sucks in some way, shape, or form, you can just put that in and it'll output the most exploitative thing possible. And that's how
What
you
if I
really end up
just
making a living in this game is you aren't trying to, if you're playing larger stakes, just staying afloat and playing a very protected strategy where no one can beat you in the long run is safe and it's fine and you'll make a living doing that. But you need to be playing like 10, 20, you need to be playing games where there's thousands on the table and everyone's stacked in order for that strategy to be better than trying to go for the throat of people. Where if you're playing a 2-5 game, if you're not going for the throat of people, you're going to make a little. You're not going to be able to make a living. And maybe that's fine if you're just trying to make a little. If you're trying to grind up your role, that might be how you start. But most people, they're just trying to have fun. So this is all way beyond how most players approach the game.
But let's say that you have a solver or a companion with you, like on your screen while you're playing online. Couldn't someone just start playing poker with no knowledge and just do exactly what the program tells them to do, and just like fire up like 10 tables? Like, wouldn't that player with 100% bot assistance or AI assistance or solver assistance be a winning player, like given enough time? And like if you just follow exactly what the solver program tells you to do, like theoretically I could be a winning player. Anyone could be, right? I don't know if that's like illegal or not, but let's just take that aside for a second. Like if I just had the perfect robot companion tell me what to do, couldn't I just ultimately be winning? Like just do exactly what it tells me to do.
Yeah, absolutely. You totally could. And every major site that is licensed and regulated, which those don't exist in most of America because there's a long issue with license and regulating gambling sites. There's like ethical arguments why it isn't allowed in lots of states. But most of the states, most outside of America, there are sites, Poker Stars, what's the other one? GG Poker, Party Poker, 888, all these large sites that host 5 to 6 figures of volume. They have, what's the word? They have a department that checks for it. I'm trying to forget the name of it. I think it's an integrity department.
Okay,
is what they call it. They all have a designated
fraud department. Okay,
yeah,
so
a fraud detection department. Yeah, and they know what perfect poker looks like. Everyone, it is publicly knowledgeable what is like correct poker in a vacuum. It is just incredibly difficult to execute to that degree, and the bots know if you're doing it. They know, like, they can check to make sure that if pre-flop you're supposed to take like king jack and like play at 88% and fold at 12, they know you're folding at 12% of the time because they have your hands written down. They have a log of all your hands that they're doing, and they're constantly checking through all your stuff. They've been pretty good at finding those kind of bots.
And they can do that even if you deliberately throw in like some misplays every once in a while, just to like keep
but then you're just being a human. And there's certainly a way you can get around it. There was a guy that there were 2 people that were banned from an online site recently because they had an RTA. Real-time assistance is what you're describing. We call it RTA. They had an RTA tool on a separate computer. And they were more or less playing on one computer, looking up the solutions on the other. The only thing, though, is that where technology is at right now, what you could do is solve for every single spot in advance and then look it up like through an archive, basically. That is a way you could do that. But all of this technology that solves, it takes a whole lot of computing power to know how to play this game correctly. When I try and use my software on my computer, like, I'd say a quarter of the time, my computer's not strong enough to do it. I have a friend that rented a server in a different country so that he can look up these spots because his computer that has like 32 gigs of RAM can't do it. Mm-hmm. So there are apps that have libraries of them. For integrity, safety reasons, they all intentionally lag. So that is an issue that can come up. We have found pretty good ways to work around it as a community, though. But that could eventually become a more serious issue. But I have no worries that live poker will ever die just because of how soft the games are, why people play, how they play, what leads to them making decisions in real time. I'm not worried about poker dying at all.
Yeah. This has been a really fascinating conversation. This is honestly one of the more interesting conversations I've had the pleasure of doing on this show. I will just leave you, Cliffy, with one last question. And this is going to be probably the most like inside baseball or inside poker question of them all. that big controversy. Is
Mike
it Garrett?
Postle?
Yes, Garrett.
Oh,
Garrett
Garrett
versus
Adelstein.
Garrett Adelstein versus Robbi. What happened there? What's your take?
Yeah. So the first large case like this that I saw was a guy named Mike Postle that was cheating on a
Oh,
live
that's right. Yeah,
stream.
that was the
Yeah.
predecessor, right? Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
and he's playing at a casino like somewhat local to me. Like I've played there before. I haven't played on the live stream there. Um, he was cheating and he was terrible at it. He would, fold a full house correctly and then call with ace high correctly and like basically the same spot because the guy had the correct cards the other time. And if you took a world class player and you gave them insider info, you told them what the whole cards were and you gave them the ability to cheat, and they did it very carefully and they did like minor deviations, not massive deviations, they probably never get caught. Um, I think that there is some chance that so for anyone that doesn't know, there's this lady, Robbi Jade Lude, that was on a pretty high stakes live cash stream. And one of the end bosses of that stream, his name's Garrett Adelstein, um, they got in a large hand, and Garrett tried to bluff her. Um, and she made an absurdly light hero call. And the reason it is absurd is because half of the time Garrett is bluffing, you still lose. Your hand is so bad, you lose when he's bluffing. And it was a hand that had very bad properties, but she explained them as good properties, which there's a good chance that she's just
Not a very
ignorant.
good
And
player.
yeah,
Yeah,
there's a very large chance that she's just ignorant and just decided he's been pushing me around all day. I call
I'm
and
gonna make
didn't
a
make
stand.
the. I'm gonna make a stand, and she didn't make the connection that this is not a hand. This is a hand I literally cannot make a stand with, because it's like so bottom of the barrel. It's like I understand you're pushing me around, but I cannot. It's like if someone's egging you to fight and like you have boxing gloves and then later they're egging you to fight and you have your fists and then later they're egging you to fight and your hands are broken, you're like, okay, now I'll fight. It's like
This
that
might not be
doesn't
the
work.
hill to make a stand. Yeah.
Yes. And I will say that it totally, if you look at the hand in a vacuum, when I looked at it, it definitely looked like cheating. And there were a lot of weird things that happened. Like we found out someone in the game was backing her, providing her money to play in the game, which is not something you should do if you're both sitting at the table because it gives you the opportunity to collude.
Hmm.
I do not think that I think at the end of the day, she didn't cheat, but I'm not 100% certain. It's like no one's 100% certain on this. They did an investigation. They didn't find anything. They found a lot of very weird things. Like they found that someone stole money, and they found that those people
That's right.
were staking each other, or that one staked the other. Um, and there's a lot of people. I heard there's a lot of people in LA that are kind of seeking attention. There's
Yeah.
there's the industry there. A lot of people there are trying to get their name out
People
there.
came out of the woodwork and started saying stuff in support or not in support of one player. Like there was a whole bunch of stuff that, to the point where I think Garrett actually came out recently on what was that podcast he did with Polk, right? Where
With
he
Doug
actually came
Polk,
out
yeah.
as, yeah, where he started saying stuff because he's like, I can't be silent anymore. Just there's just too much like
Yeah,
mess
he
going
had an
on.
awkward scenario where he doesn't want to, like, he wants to express his opinion because he feels he's been cheated, and he has been cheated. He's talked about that he's been cheated in games before of, um, not live games, private games. He's been cheated, and he knows what cheating looks like. And there is no way that a call like that has ever happened in the history of the world. Like, it really is mind-boggling that she was correct. But if she was wrong, like, we would never be talking about this again. We'd just say, oh, it's some bimbo just playing with fun money.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that she did not cheat, but I'm not
Okay.
certain enough. I think she's just a bad player that tried to put her foot down, and she's just so recreationally that she doesn't know that she is. I do think though that Garrett is in the most awkward spot though because he doesn't want to be wrong if he's wrong or if there isn't proof, and then be an outcast in the community that he's made a living in. He has that tension of I want to play in this game. I also want to not be a sellout.
Right. It's a tough. tough thing to balance for sure. I don't envy that for anyone. And something you mentioned is like in this case, like it's not black and white. Like there's a range of like, is the person cheating or not? And it's like one in a way we'll never know. We'll never know, right? Like it's just like unless you're actually Robbi, like we'll never know. It's just it'll
That's
stay
true.
that way. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really hard if you're any form of a mental athlete and you think that you might not be playing in a fair arena. That has to be just the most shaking thing in the world.
Yeah.
Like I've spent my life crafting my game plan and I don't get to execute it.
Yeah. That's sky's falling stuff.
Yeah.
But anyhow, Cliffy, it was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for taking the time, and I wish you continued success in poker and Magic.
Thanks, James. Had a lot of fun.